The cafeteria buzzed with its usual midday chaos, trays clattering, laughter bouncing off the walls, the occasional shout rising above the din. Emily Carter sat at her usual table near the windows, sunlight streaming in and catching the golden highlights in her hair. She twirled a straw in her juice box, listening to her best friend, Jess, recount last night's disastrous attempt at baking cookies. "You set the oven to broil instead of bake?" Emily laughed, shaking her head. "How do you even?" The words died in her throat as a shadow fell across the table. Tiffany Reynolds stood over them, flanked by her usual entourage. Megan with her ever-present sneer and Lauren, who always looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Tiffany's manicured fingers drummed against the tabletop, her French-tipped nails clicking like tiny warning shots. "Problem?" Emily asked, keeping her voice light even as her shoulders tensed. Tiffany's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just wondering how long you think you can keep pretending, Carter." "Pretending what?" Jess shot back, already half out of her seat. "That she belongs here." Tiffany's gaze never left Emily's face. "With us." Emily exhaled slowly through her nose, the way her old trainer had taught her. "Count to 4. Hold. Release. We've got practice soon, Tiff. Unless you're planning to try out for the squad." The slap landed so fast Emily didn't even see it coming. One moment she was speaking, the next, pain exploded across her left cheek, her head snapping sideways with the force of the blow. Her juice box hit the floor with a wet splat. The entire cafeteria gasped in unison. Emily sat frozen, her fingers hovering near her stinging cheek. When she pulled them away, the tips came back smeared with blood. Tiffany's ring must have cut her. A hush fell over the room. Even the teachers by the door had stopped talking, their eyes wide. Tiffany flexed her hand, looking almost surprised at her own actions. But then the smugness returned, her chin lifting in challenge. "Oops." Emily stood up. Slowly, deliberately. The chair legs screeched against the tile floor. Every pair of eyes in the cafeteria tracked her movement as she stepped around the table. Jess grabbed her wrist. Don't." But Emily gently shook her off. Tiffany's smirk faltered when Emily got close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "You shouldn't have done that," Emily said, her voice so quiet only their immediate circle could hear. Tiffany recovered quickly, tossing her highlighted hair over one shoulder. "What are you gonna do, Carter? Report me?" She laughed, glancing at her friends for backup. Like anyone would believe. Emily's fist connected with Tiffany's nose in a crunch that echoed. The sound was horrifying, satisfying, unmistakable. Tiffany staggered back, hands flying to her face as blood gushed between her fingers. Her shocked scream pierced the air. Emily didn't let her fall. She grabbed Tiffany's designer sweater with one hand, yanking her forward until their faces were inches apart. "You want to know why I don't belong here?" Emily whispered, her breath ghosting over Tiffany's tear-streaked face. "Because girls like you, you're just prey." She released her grip, letting Tiffany crumple to the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and smeared mascara. The cafeteria erupted. Someone screamed. Chairs overturned as students scrambled for their phones. A teacher shouted for order, but no one listened. Emily turned in a slow circle, making eye contact with every stunned face. Megan and Lauren had backed up against the wall, their earlier bravado gone. Even the football players, usually so quick to jump into fights, stayed rooted in place. She wiped her bloody knuckles on her cheerleading skirt and walked out, the crowd parting before her like the Red Sea. Behind her, Tiffany's sobs turned into shrieks of rage. "You're dead, Carter. Do you hear me? Dead." Emily didn't look back, because Tiffany was wrong. Emily Carter had died 3 years ago. The girl walking away, that was someone much more dangerous. The fluorescent lights in Principal Higgins' office hummed like angry bees. Emily sat perfectly still in the hard plastic chair, her hands folded in her lap. The cut on her cheek had stopped bleeding, but it throbbed in time with her pulse. Across the room, Tiffany sniffled dramatically into a tissue, her nose swollen and taped. Her father, tall, silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than Emily's entire wardrobe, paced behind her like a caged tiger. "This is assault." Mr. Reynolds slammed his palm on the principal's desk, making the nameplate rattle. "I want her expelled." "Arrested." Principal Higgins adjusted his glasses, his forehead shiny with sweat. "Mr. Reynolds, please. Look at my daughter's face." Emily tuned them out, focusing instead on the trophy case behind the principal's desk. The football championship cup from last year gleamed under the lights. She wondered how many of those players had gotten into fights. How many had been suspended for worse than what she'd done? "Emily." Principal Higgins' voice pulled her back. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" She met his gaze evenly. "Tiffany hit me first." "That's a lie." Tiffany shrieked, then winced at the pain in her nose. 37 witnesses say otherwise, Emily said. Mr. Reynolds scoffed. "As if that matters." "My daughter is a bully," Emily interrupted. The room went silent. "She's been harassing students for years. But because her daddy donates to the school, no one does anything about it." Principal Higgins' face turned red. "That's enough, Emily." "No, I think it's just getting started." Emily leaned forward, bracing her elbows on her knees. "Because here's what's going to happen. You're going to suspend me, not expel, because you know a lawsuit would ruin you. Tiffany will play the victim. And in 2 weeks, when I come back," she smiled sweetly, "we'll all pretend this never happened." Mr. Reynolds looked like he might have an aneurysm. "You insolent little." The door burst open. Emily's foster mother, Mrs. Alvarez, stood in the doorway, her work scrubs wrinkled, her dark hair escaping its messy bun. She took in the scene with one sweeping glance: Emily's split lip, Tiffany's taped nose, the principal's panicked expression, and sighed. "Again, Meja." Emily's shoulders slumped for the first time all day. "She started it." Mrs. Alvarez nodded like this made perfect sense. She turned to Principal Higgins. "How long is the suspension?" 3 days, the principal said quickly, avoiding Mr. Reynolds' glare. "Good." Mrs. Alvarez grabbed Emily's backpack from the floor. "Let's go." As they walked out, Tiffany hissed, "This isn't over." Emily didn't turn around. She already knew it wasn't. The fluorescent lights of the school hallway flickered overhead as Emily Carter walked through the front doors, her backpack slung over one shoulder. 3 days of suspension had done nothing to ease the tension coiled in her muscles. If anything, the time away had made her more aware of the stares, the whispers that followed her like shadows as she made her way to her locker. Jess was already waiting for her, leaning against the row of lockers with her arms crossed. "You look like hell," she said, eyeing the dark circles under Emily's eyes. "Thanks," Emily muttered, spinning the combination into her lock. The metal door clanged open, revealing the usual mess of textbooks and crumpled papers. But something was off. Emily frowned as she reached inside, her fingers brushing against something that definitely didn't belong. A single, folded piece of paper. She pulled it out, unfolding it carefully. The message was short, written in jagged, angry letters. Asterisk, "You're dead, Carter." Asterisk. Jess peeked over her shoulder. "Classy." Emily crumpled the note in her fist, her jaw tightening. It wasn't the threat that bothered her. It was the fact that someone had gotten into her locker. That meant they knew her combination. That meant this wasn't just some random act of bullying. This was personal. First period. A warning. Mr. Henderson's history class was already in full swing when Emily slipped into her seat near the back. The teacher barely glanced up from his lecture, droning on about the Civil War as if nothing had changed. But everything had. Emily could feel the weight of stares burning into the back of her neck. Tiffany's friends, Megan and Lauren, sat a few rows ahead, whispering behind their hands. Ryan Carter, the linebacker who tried to confront her yesterday, was glaring at her from across the room. And then there was Tiffany herself. She sat in the front row, her nose still slightly swollen from where Emily had broken it. When she turned to glance back, her lips curled into a slow, vicious smile. Emily met her gaze evenly, refusing to look away. Tiffany mouthed 2 words. Asterisk, "Watch your back." Asterisk. Lunchtime. The first move. The cafeteria was a battlefield. Emily knew it the second she walked in. The usual din of chatter dipped for just a second as heads turned in her direction, then surged back louder than before. Jess stuck close to her side, her usual sarcasm replaced by nervous energy. "You sure you want to sit here?" Jess asked as they approached their usual table. Emily didn't answer. She just dropped her tray onto the table and sat down, her back to the wall so she could see the entire room. It didn't take long. Tiffany stood up from her table across the cafeteria, her entourage falling in behind her like obedient soldiers. They moved through the crowd with purpose, their eyes locked on Emily. Jess tensed. "Oh shit." Emily didn't move. She just watched as Tiffany stopped in front of her table, her manicured fingers drumming against the surface. "Miss me, Carter?" Tiffany asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Emily took a slow sip of her water. Not even a little. Tiffany's smile didn't waver. "Good. Because I brought you a welcome back present." She snapped her fingers. Megan stepped forward, slamming a folded piece of paper onto the table in front of Emily. Emily didn't touch it. "Another note. You're really committed to this whole villain monologue thing, huh?" Tiffany's eyes flashed. "Open it." Emily sighed, unfolding the paper. It wasn't a note. It was a flyer. At the top, in bold letters, it read, *Friday night. The warehouse. You versus everyone. *. Emily's stomach dropped. She knew exactly what this was. A fight club invitation. And not just any fight club, the underground one she'd sworn she'd never go back to. Tiffany leaned in, her breath hot against Emily's ear. "You think you're so tough? Prove it." Then she straightened, her smirk widening as she turned to walk away. Emily stared at the flyer, her fingers tightening around the edges. She had two choices: run or fight, and Emily Carter had never been good at running. After school, the decision. The walk home was quiet. Emily kept her head down, her hands shoved deep in her pockets as she navigated the crowded sidewalks. The flyer burned a hole in her backpack, its words replaying in her mind like a taunt. You versus everyone. She knew what that meant. It wasn't just a fight. It was a trap. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. "Jess, you gonna do it?" Emily didn't reply, because the truth was, she didn't know. The apartment. Memories. Mrs. Alvarez wasn't home yet. Emily locked the door behind her, dropping her backpack onto the floor with a thud. The apartment was small, the walls covered in old photos and mismatched furniture. It was nothing like the sterile foster homes she'd bounced between before landing here. She walked to her room, shutting the door behind her before kneeling beside her bed. Her fingers found the loose floorboard easily. It creaked as she pried it up, revealing the small, hidden space beneath. Inside was a single item. A pair of worn hand wraps, the fabric stained with old blood. Emily exhaled, running her fingers over the familiar material. She hadn't touched these in years, hadn't let herself even think about them. But now she didn't have a choice. The abandoned factory on the edge of town loomed like a graveyard of rusted metal and broken glass. Emily stood across the street, her breath fogging in the cold night air as she watched figures slip through the chain-link fence one by one. She flexed her fingers inside the pockets of her hoodie, the familiar weight of her hand wraps hidden beneath the fabric. She hadn't worn them in years, hadn't let herself, but tonight she dug them out from under the floorboard and wrapped them methodically, the way her old trainer had taught her. Tight enough to protect, loose enough to move. A car door slammed behind her. Jess jogged up, her face pale under the flickering streetlight. "You're actually doing this?" Emily didn't answer. Jess grabbed her arm. This is a bad idea. That place is." "I know what it is." Emily pulled away, adjusting the straps of her backpack. Inside was a change of clothes, a water bottle, and a first aid kit. She'd packed it automatically, muscle memory from another life. Jess swallowed hard. "Then you know Tiffany's not just gonna fight you fair. She's got people in there. Dangerous people. Emily finally looked at her. So do I. The pit. The warehouse stank of sweat, blood, and cheap beer. Emily stepped through the rusted doors, the roar of the crowd hitting her like a physical force. The space had been cleared in the center, makeshift bleachers of crates and folding chairs forming a rough circle around a taped-off square, the pit. And in the pit, Tiffany. She stood under the buzzing floodlights, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her hands already wrapped. When she spotted Emily, her lips curled into a grin. "Took you long enough," she called over the noise. "Thought you chickened out." The crowd laughed, their faces a blur of leering grins and raised phones. Emily recognized some of them. Football players, cheerleaders, even a few teachers who definitely shouldn't be here. She ignored them all, walking straight to the edge of the pit. A hand grabbed her shoulder. Emily reacted without thinking. She twisted, driving her elbow back hard. Ryan Carter gasped as the blow connected with his ribs, staggering away. "Touch me again," Emily said softly, "and I'll break it." Ryan's face darkened, but he didn't move. Tiffany clapped mockingly from the pit. "Oh, scary. You gonna fight him instead? Or are you actually gonna face me?" Emily shrugged off her hoodie, tossing it to Jess. Underneath, she wore a tank top, the scars on her arms and shoulders visible in the harsh light. The crowd went quiet. Tiffany's smirk faltered. Emily stepped into the pit. Round 1. The makeshift referee, a hulking guy Emily didn't recognize, gave the signal. Tiffany lunged first. She was fast, her fist aimed straight for Emily's still healing split lip. Emily dodged left, letting the punch graze her cheek. The crowd OD. Tiffany swung again. And again. Emily let her. She didn't block, didn't strike back, just moved, her feet light on the concrete, her body weaving around every attack like water. Tiffany's breaths came faster, her face flushing. "Fight back, you coward." Emily didn't. Because she wasn't just fighting Tiffany. She was fighting the crowd. And she knew how this worked. They wanted a show. They wanted blood. And the longer she denied them, the angrier they'd get. The angrier Tiffany would get. Round 2. Tiffany's next punch was wild, fueled by frustration. Emily caught her wrist, yanking her forward until they were nose to nose. "You don't know what you're playing with," Emily whispered. Tiffany spat in her face. The crowd roared. Emily wiped her cheek slowly. Then, finally, she struck. Her fist connected with Tiffany's stomach, driving the air from her lungs in a whoosh. Tiffany doubled over, gasping, but Emily didn't let her drop. She grabbed Tiffany's ponytail, forcing her head up. "Had enough?" Emily asked. Tiffany's eyes burned with hate. "Never." Emily sighed. Then she broke Tiffany's nose. Again. Aftermath. The warehouse was silent as Tiffany crumpled to the ground, blood pouring between her fingers. Emily turned to the crowd. No one moved. She grabbed her hoodie from Jess and walked out, the sea of spectators parting before her. Behind her, someone whispered, "What the hell is she?" Emily didn't answer. She just disappeared into the night. The morning after the warehouse fight, Emily walked into school like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The whispers started the second she stepped off the bus. Students pressed themselves against lockers to let her pass, their eyes wide and flickering with something new. Fear, respect, awe. Even the teachers watched her differently, their usual stern glares replaced by wary hesitation. Jess was waiting at her locker, bouncing on the balls of her feet. Dude, you are legendary." Emily shrugged, spinning her combination. "It was just a fight. Jess gaped at her. The entire school saw you destroy Tiffany. There are videos. Like everywhere." Emily's stomach dropped. "Videos?" Jess winced. "Yeah, about that." She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen. A grainy, shaky video played, Emily in the pit, dodging Tiffany's swings like they were in slow motion. Then the punch. The blood. The way Tiffany had crumpled. The video had over 50,000 views. Emily's hands curled into fists. Who posted this? Ryan, probably. Or one of Tiffany's lackeys. Jess bit her lip. But that's not the worst part. She swiped to another video. This one was older, the quality worse. It showed a different warehouse. A different fight. A younger Emily, maybe 14, standing over a guy twice her size, her knuckles split and bloody. Emily's breath caught. That fight. That night. She hadn't just walked away from the underground scene. She'd run. First period, the truth comes out. Mr. Henderson's classroom was dead silent when Emily walked in. Tiffany's usual seat was empty. Ryan Carter sat slumped in his chair, his ribs wrapped tight under his shirt. He didn't meet Emily's eyes, but someone else did. A boy Emily had never seen before leaned against the back wall, his arms crossed. He was tall, with dark hair and a jagged scar cutting through one eyebrow. When Emily glanced at him, he smirked. Not a friendly smirk. A recognition smirk. Emily's pulse spiked. Because she knew that look. Knew him. Derek Walsh. Her old trainer's son. And the last person she'd ever wanted to see again. The note. Emily found it tucked into her textbook after class. A single line, scrawled in familiar handwriting. Asterisk. Dad wants to see you. Asterisk. No signature. None needed. Emily crumpled the note, her chest tight. Because Dad wasn't just Derek's father. He was the man who'd turned a scrawny orphan into a weapon. And he didn't take kindly to weapons that went rogue. Lunchtime, the offer. Derek slid into the seat across from Emily like he owned it. Jess stiffened. Who the hell? Private conversation, Derek said, not looking at her. His eyes stayed locked on Emily. Beat it. Jess opened her mouth to argue, but Emily shook her head. It's okay. Jess hesitated, then grabbed her tray and left, shooting Derek a glare. Derek waited until she was gone before speaking. You look good, Carter. Emily stabbed her fork into her mashed potatoes. What do you want, Walsh? Straight to business. I like that. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Dad saw the video. He was impressed. Emily's grip on her fork tightened. I'm not fighting again. Derek laughed. Yeah, see, that's the thing. You don't get to decide that. He slid a flyer across the table. Not like the one Tiffany had given her. This was professional. Glossy. At the top, in bold letters. Asterisk Midnight Mayhem. $10,000 prize. One night only. Asterisk. Emily shoved it back. No. Derek's smile didn't waver. It's not a request. Then he stood, adjusting his jacket. Be at the old gym Friday. Midnight. Or else. Emily didn't ask what or else meant. She already knew. After school. The warning. Mrs. Alvarez was waiting when Emily got home. She stood in the kitchen, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. On the table in front of her was an envelope. Emily froze. What's that? Mrs. Alvarez sighed. It's from the school. Emily's stomach twisted. Am I suspended again? No. Mrs. Alvarez picked up the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. It's a transfer request. For Tiffany Reynolds. Emily blinked. What? Mrs. Alvarez met her eyes. Her parents are pulling her out. Said she doesn't feel safe here anymore. She paused. Because of you. Emily didn't know what to say. Because this? This wasn't victory. It was a warning. The old gym smelled like sweat, mildew, and the faint metallic tang of blood that never quite washed out of the mats. Emily stood in the shadows of the entrance, her hands curled into fists inside her hoodie pockets. She hadn't been here in 3 years. Hadn't wanted to ever come back. But the crumpled flyer in her back pocket, and Derek's threat, left her no choice. The space had been transformed since she'd last seen it. Bleachers had been dragged in from some forgotten high school, forming a rough oval around the central ring. A banner hung over the cage, the words Midnight Mayhem spray-painted in dripping red letters. And the people. God, the people. She recognized half of them, Fighters, gamblers, the kind of wealthy spectators who got off on watching kids bleed. The other half were new, their faces eager in the flickering fluorescent light. Derek spotted her immediately. "Look who finally showed up," he called, his voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. He strode toward her, his trademark smirk in place. "Starting to think you'd chickened out." Emily didn't rise to the bait. "Where's your father?" "Business first." Derek grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in just a little too tight. "You're up in 20. Opponent's a newcomer, some college wrestler thinking he's tough." Emily yanked her arm free. "I didn't agree to this." Derek's smile didn't waver. "You don't have to agree. You just have to fight." Then he leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "And make it bloody." The crowd paid good money for a show. The fight. The bell rang. Emily stepped into the cage, the chain-link door clanging shut behind her. Across the ring, her opponent cracked his knuckles, a hulking guy with a wrestler's build and a nose that had been broken more than once. The announcer's voice boomed through the gym. Asterisk, in this corner, we have the Mountain Mike Reynolds, fresh off a Division I championship season. Asterisk. The crowd roared. Emily barely heard them. Because that name, Asterisk Reynolds Asterisk, echoed in her skull like a gunshot. Tiffany's brother. This wasn't a coincidence. This was revenge. Round 1. Mike came at her like a freight train, his massive arms swinging. Emily dodged the first punch, the second, but the third clipped her shoulder, sending her staggering back into the cage. The crowd screamed. Mike grinned, flexing his fingers. "Heard you messed up my little sister." Emily wiped blood from her lip. She messed herself up. Mike's grin vanished. He charged. This time, Emily was ready. She ducked under his swing, driving her fist into his ribs with a crack that made the crowd gasp. Mike wheezed, stumbling, but didn't go down. Emily didn't let up. She remembered what Derek had said, asterisk make it bloody asterisk. But more than that, she remembered the videos. The way Tiffany had smirked when she thought she'd won. So she fought. Not like the disciplined fighter she'd been trained to be, but like the angry, broken kid she used to be. The end. It took 6 minutes. 6 minutes of fists and blood and the deafening roar of the crowd. When it was over, Mike was on his knees, his face a mess of bruises and split skin. Emily stood over him, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her knuckles dripping red onto the mat. The ref raised her hand. The crowd lost their minds. And from the shadows, a pair of cold, calculating eyes watched it all. The aftermath. Derek found her in the locker room, patching up her bleeding knuckles with shaky hands. "Told you you'd miss it," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Emily didn't look up. "I didn't miss shit." Derek laughed, tossing her a wad of cash. 10 grand. Just like we promised. Emily let the money hit the floor. "I don't want it." "Too bad." Derek's smile faded. "Because Dad says you're back in. Starting now." Emily finally looked at him. "Or what?" Derek's expression turned pitying. "Or we tell Child Services exactly where your foster mom gets her extra income." Emily's blood ran cold. Because that was a threat she couldn't fight. The rain fell in sheets as Emily stood outside the abandoned gym for what she swore would be the last time. Her ribs ached from the fight with Mike, her knuckles were still raw, and the weight of Derek's threat pressed down on her like a physical force. She pushed open the rusted door. Inside, the gym was silent. No crowd, no flashing lights, no roar of bloodthirsty spectators. Just Derek and his father, Marcus Walsh, sitting in folding chairs at the center of the ring like kings on their thrones. Marcus hadn't changed. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face carved from stone and eyes that missed nothing. He looked up as Emily approached, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said, voice rough as gravel. "Been a long time." She stopped at the edge of the ring, her hands clenched at her sides. "I'm done after tonight." Marcus chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't get to be done. Not after what you pulled." Derek smirked, twirling a knife between his fingers. "Should've just stayed gone, Carter." Emily exhaled slowly, counting to 4 like her old trainer, Marcus had taught her. "What do you want?" Marcus stood, his shadow stretching across the ring. One last fight. Winner walks away. Loser. He shrugged. Well, let's just say Child Services gets an interesting call. Emily's stomach twisted. Who's the opponent? The door behind her creaked open. Footsteps echoed through the empty gym. Emily turned and froze. Tiffany Reynolds stood in the doorway, her nose still slightly crooked from their last fight, her eyes burning with hate. But it wasn't Tiffany that made Emily's breath catch. It was the gun in her hand. The truth. You didn't really think it was about the fights, did you? Tiffany sneered, stepping into the light. Emily's mind raced. The videos. The blackmail. The way everything had spiraled so perfectly out of control. This wasn't just revenge. It was a setup. Marcus sighed like he was disappointed. You were always my best, Emily. But even the best need to be reminded of their place. Derek tossed a pair of gloves into the ring. So, what's it gonna be? Emily looked at the gun, at Tiffany's shaking hands, at Marcus's cold, calculating stare. Then she smiled and lunged. The final fight. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. But for the first time in years, Emily fought like she had nothing left to lose. Derek went down first, his nose shattered by a well-placed elbow. Tiffany screamed, firing wildly. The bullet ricocheted off the ceiling as Emily wrenched the gun from her grip and flung it aside. Marcus was last. He fought like the trainer he was. Brutal, efficient, relentless. But Emily had learned from the best. And she had something he didn't. A reason to walk away. The end. The police found Marcus Walsh and his son bleeding but alive, cuffed to the ring with their own zip ties. Tiffany's confession, recorded on Emily's phone, played on a loop for the detectives. And Mrs. Alvarez? She was waiting outside the station when Emily was finally released, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. You, she said, pulling Emily into a bone-crushing hug, are grounded. Emily laughed, her face pressed into her foster mother's shoulder. For the first time in years, it felt like a promise, like a future, like home. The transfer papers went through the next week. A new school, a fresh start. Jess visited every weekend, smuggling in contraband candy and gossip about the fallout at Jefferson High. Tiffany's family moved away. Derek and Marcus faced a laundry list of charges. And Emily. She kept her hands wrapped, not for fighting, but for boxing classes at the community center, where she taught younger kids how to throw a punch properly, just in case. Because the world was full of bullies. And sometimes the quiet cheerleader needed to remember she could throw a knockout hit.